so much, Max and Monica, for allowing me and giving me the privilege to be here. I really feel honored to be in this special space, and I really would like to thank Justice, truly, for arranging this. I would love to have an introduction like that every time, so thank you so much. You know, my grandmother was the executive director of the Peabody Museum in New Haven, Connecticut. And I got in a lot of trouble with my grandmother over the years running around the museum. And that was one of the reasons why I decided it wasn't a good idea to have an exercise class in this space. I kind of had memories come back in the middle of the night. But in all seriousness, I really am honored to be here. I'm so excited to be sharing this information with you guys. And really, that is my goal today. My goal is to share with you some very, very specific information that we, and my team is here, as Max mentioned, Andrew, Michelle, Lorianne, Kevon, and John. We as a team, okay, are a passionate group of people dedicated to helping people living with diabetes. That is what we are actually professionally focused on. And it is an honor to be sharing this information, meeting new people. I really, really hope that this information that I'm going to share with you today is of value. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions either during or after this presentation, okay? So, today's presentation is about following your heart. And I mean that both literally and figuratively, okay? If you can go ahead and hit the next slide. So just to give you a little bit more about what GlucoseZone is I founded FitScript, the name of our company, back in 2012 as a company dedicated to helping people living with diabetes reach their fitness goals. And the first thing we did was we opened up a very unique fitness center. It is a fitness center that is dedicated exclusively to diabetes. You can't come there if you don't have diabetes. And it functions as a fitness laboratory where we host people living with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, gestational diabetes, type 1.5 diabetes, people who have diabetes as the result of pancreatic cancer. Okay? We host them actually at our center, and we offer very specific guidance. We also have a multimedia broadcasting studio, and every day we broadcast through the internet exercise for diabetes. And we've developed an app called GlucoseZone, which enables you to follow our instruction while at the same time incorporating your real-time diabetes information. And that's the result of technology. Technology is an amazing thing, and I know there are some members of the audience today that are developing some very exciting technology, and my hope is that this information that I'm going to share can be applied to that. So, in our fitness laboratory, we have actually documented several thousand exercise sessions of people living with diabetes. And in those exercise sessions, we have meticulously documented the correlating variables that impact glucose levels, okay, during and after exercise. And what we've been able to do is identify 6 discrete variables that are always present when a person living with diabetes performs exercise. Now, these 6, it's not limited to 6, okay? And I'll use an example. If somebody, for example, gets sick or gets a cold, that would be another variable that would have to be accounted for with managing diabetes, okay? But these 6 variables are always there. And what these 6 variables are your actual glucose level, your heart rate level, the presence of insulin and counter-regulatory hormones, the time of day, the activity type and duration of activity that you are performing, and food and nutrition. Those 6 things are like pieces to a puzzle. And if you can understand the relevance of each one of those 6 pieces, then you're going to have a much better chance and you're going to have a much better success in managing your diabetes. Now, we are here this weekend for the American Diabetes Expo, American Diabetes Association Expo. And the reality of diabetes is that 29 out of 30 people living with diabetes have type 2 diabetes. Okay? And that reality certainly kind of leads us at GlucoseZone in terms of our programming. But I have type 1 diabetes. It was my experience with type 1 diabetes that really led me to found this company. And Justice, who's I connected with a few years ago at another diabetes conference, has type 1 diabetes. So we thought today would be a really amazing opportunity to share very specifically about type 1 diabetes and identify and talk about one of the variables in depth, okay? And the variable that we are going to focus in on today is the heart, the relationship that your heart has to changes in your glucose levels during and after exercise, okay? Okay, so when people are living with type 1 diabetes, okay, there's only one thing that makes a person living with type 1 diabetes different than somebody who doesn't have type 1 diabetes, okay? And what that thing is they have to perform something called insulin hormone replacement therapy, okay? That is what type 1 diabetes requires. So the diagnosis of type 1 diabetes is the result of your pancreas has stopped producing insulin. And so a person living with type 1 has to replace that hormone in order to live, okay, and in order to function. There is a relationship between your cardiovascular system and your endocrine system. And for people who don't have diabetes, that relationship is an involuntary relationship. In other words, what that means is your heart and your pancreas work together with each other in an incredibly sophisticated way without you ever knowing it. That is, unless you have type 1 diabetes. If you have type 1 diabetes, you have to voluntarily manage that relationship between your cardiovascular system and the need for and the presence of insulin, okay? And when we talk about the 6 variables of the glucose zone, the heart rate and the cardiovascular system certainly applies to type 2 diabetes, but it's actually a very, very different thing, because for most people living with type 2 diabetes, they don't have to manage insulin replacement hormone therapy, okay? So that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about understanding this relationship between heart rate levels and ultimately glucose levels and how the presence of insulin impacts that. And what I want to start with is understanding what is insulin, okay? So, insulin is a hormone that does primarily 2 things in your body. Insulin causes the absorption of glucose into your liver and into your muscles, stored as something called glycogen. It causes the absorption of glucose into your fat cells as something called triglycerides, okay? So insulin causes the absorption of glucose, but it also does something else. Insulin inhibits lipid utilization. Now, what does the term lipid utilization mean? Lipid utilization means fat metabolism. Now, I'm going to say that again because almost everybody living with diabetes understands the relationship between insulin and glucose. They understand insulin causes the absorption of glucose. What they don't understand is the equally important relationship between insulin and fat metabolism, and the fact that insulin inhibits fat metabolism. Well, go ahead, hit the next slide. So we like to joke around a lot at the GlucoseZone and come up with funny analogies, okay? And we like to think of insulin like a traffic cop, okay? And that's an easy, fun way to think about what is insulin. When insulin becomes present in your blood, it goes, stop fat. Fat, you are staying in that parking lot until all this glucose comes in. And it shuttles it. First, the insulin causes the absorption in the liver. Then when the liver parking lot fills up, now it heads to the muscles. And now when the muscle parking lot fills up, now the rest of the glucose gets sent to the back of the fat parking lot. And as long as insulin is present in your blood, nothing is coming out of the fat parking lot. All right? That role as a traffic cop is very, very important to understand when we apply it to heart rate training. So, who here has ever heard the advice that it's a good idea to use your heart rate as a training guide? Right? Anybody? I'm sure most people who have ever exercised, you've been advised, and especially, you know, if you're really with serious triathletes or anybody who basically considers themselves to be a serious distance or aerobic athlete, they'll monitor their heart rate. And you know, I'm wearing my little wearable right now, monitors my heart rate, okay? Why do we do that? Why do we train by our heart rate? The reason why we do that is because depending on the heart rate that we exercise in, our body is designed to utilize different sources of energy, okay? And those sources of energy come from a ratio of glucose and lipids. Those are scientific terms, okay? You could also think of those as carbs and fat, all right? So whenever we are talking about heart rate training and understanding the heart, we have to understand that depending on the heart rate level that we exercise in, our body is designed to utilize a different ratio of lipids and glucose, okay? The whole, very important to understand, is that if we are going to utilize fats or utilize lipids, that requires the presence of counter-regulatory hormones and the lack of the presence of insulin. I'm going to say that again. If we are going to use lipids as an energy source, it requires the presence of counter-regulatory hormones and the lack of the presence of insulin. And vice versa. If we are going to utilize carbs or glucose as a source of energy, it requires the presence of insulin. Okay? With that understanding, the whole trick to eliminating fluctuations in glucose levels is matching the presence of insulin to the natural ratios that exist and our bodies are designed to recruit energy from. Okay? And our goal at GlucoseZone, we really differentiate, to be very clear, we differentiate between exercise with type 1 diabetes versus exercise for type 2 diabetes. And our primary goal for exercise with type 1 diabetes is to help people stop having these terrible fluctuations in glucose levels. that every person living with type 1 diabetes has experienced. Every family member of a person who has type 1 diabetes is familiar with these horrible situations, okay, of crashing blood sugar, right? Or the opposite, skyrocketing blood sugar, okay? Our goal is to eliminate those fluctuations during any activity. And we use the heart rate, we follow our heart to do that. So what I want to do now is really, really break this down and go through it in a step-by-step manner. You go to the first one. So let's start with heart rate zone 1. Heart rate zone 1 is between 50 and 60% of your maximum heart rate. And a healthy person should be able to perform exercise for 2 or more hours in heart rate zone 1. And the best example would be going for a walk, okay? Now, when you exercise in heart rate zone 1, your body is designed to recruit the vast majority of energy from lipids. Okay? In fact, up to 85% of the ratio of energy being utilized to fuel that activity should be coming from lipids. And only a very, very small amount should be coming from glucose. Okay? Now, why is that so important to understand? Well, what do we know that insulin does? Insulin inhibits lipid utilization. You cannot utilize lipids if you have an inappropriate presence of insulin. So let's talk about how this applies. And let's first understand the standard guidance, because it's very, very important to understand that. Okay? The standard guidance is, in this zone, you may see a drop in your glucose levels, and you should consume 15 to 30 grams of carbohydrate every 30 minutes. Okay? That's not what we recommend. What we recommend is matching the presence of insulin to the actual carb-derived energy requirement of the heart rate zone. So if you are on an insulin pump, we recommend decreasing the basal. The basal, for those of you who don't know what that means, basal insulin is long-acting background insulin. We recommend decreasing the basal insulin by 85%, all the way down, almost, not nothing, but almost nothing, in order to match the natural ratio that our body is designed to use. Okay? Now, we recommend doing that 1 hour prior to exercise. Why do we recommend 1 hour prior to exercise? The reason why we recommend 1 hour prior to exercise is because, unfortunately, even the fastest acting insulins, okay, and for those of you who maybe don't understand, there are different types of insulin. And some are called fast or rapid acting, and others are called long acting. Even the fastest rapid acting insulin doesn't start working into your body until 15 minutes after it's been injected. Okay? Human insulin produced from the pancreas is gone within 15 minutes. So this is actually one of the most frustrating aspects of diabetes management, is that you are kind of playing a game. The game that you are playing is, I'm going to inject this insulin now, I'm going to make this adjustment to my pump now, so that later in the future, I have matched the ratio that will enable, right, steady glucose levels. Now, we recommend starting at 1 hour, but you ultimately have to apply your own personal experience. And I'm going to give you an example. We had one client come to GlucoseZone, very frustrated. He was training for the JDRF Ride to Cure, which is a 100-mile bike ride. And he was having these terrible, terrible crashes. He was literally chugging Gatorade and eating Snickers bars and still having low blood sugar. Insanity, right? So we started working on this formula. We started at 1 hour. Wasn't early enough. We went to 2 hours. It wasn't early enough. We discovered that he had to make adjustments to his insulin pump 4 hours before exercise to actually create the condition in his body where he could start to use lipids. But once he did that, it was such an exciting, incredible thing, because now here was this incredibly energetic guy who happened to be about 100 pounds overweight. That's one of the, unfortunately, when you have type 1 diabetes for over 30 years, you are susceptible to weight gain. And so here he was, he had literally 100 pounds of energy not being accessed. It was such an amazing thing when he finally had the formula in place. His energy levels skyrocketed. Okay? So 1 hour prior to exercise. Okay, the next slide. Heart rate zone 2. This is 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. Okay? The average person can do this for up to 2 hours. Okay? And a good example of this would be like golfing, if you're walking, carrying your bag, or maybe going for a bike ride, something like that. Now, heart rate zone 2, the perceived exertion would be challenging. And it's also known as the fat burning zone. So if you go to any gym in America and you get on any piece of cardio machine, a treadmill, an elliptical, a Stairmaster, without a doubt, there will be a giant graph on the thing, and it'll have your age, and it'll have your heart rate. X, Y, and then it has big giant letters, usually in red, fat burning zone. Right? And everybody's so focused on tracking their heart rate to burn fat. But the only thing that determines if you burn fat is the appropriate presence of insulin. Okay? So when you see those charts, this is what that's referencing. Now, the ratio in this zone is the same. This is why this is called the fat burning zone, because from a caloric standpoint, this is when the actual ratio of calories has the highest actual caloric burn from lipids. Now, the standard guidance is in this zone, again, you may see a drop in your glucose levels, consume 15 to 30 grams of carbs. What do we say? We say no. We say match the presence of insulin with the natural energy ratio requirements of that activity, of that exertion level. And in this case, you decrease your basal by 85%. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting. Okay, next slide. Once you cross over 70% of your maximum heart rate, the energy ratio changes. And you cross into something called the aerobic zone. Okay? The aerobic zone is between 70 and 80% of your maximum heart rate. The perceived exertion would be going for a run. Okay? And the average person should be able to perform activity for up to 60 minutes. So the example would be a soccer game, or soccer match, for example, would be a great example. Okay? Now, the standard guidance is caution, hypoglycemia alert, eat 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate every 30 minutes. Is there anybody here who has tried to eat 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate running at full speed? Yes. Yes, and has it ever been an enjoyable experience? Ever. No, it is the most ridiculous, of a long list of ridiculous suggestions, it is actually the most ridiculous. It's impossible to do. Okay? Now, do we recommend consume 30 to 60 grams every 30 minutes? No. We recommend match the presence of insulin to the natural energy requirement. But here's where this is interesting and counterintuitive. The ratio has changed. It's not 85% 15 anymore. It actually comes to a 50-50 split. 50% of the energy should be coming from lipids, while 50% should be coming from glucose-based sources. And if you are going to match the presence of insulin, that means, if we're talking about an insulin pump, you set your basal rate to 50%. Now, why is that counterintuitive? Because the insulin level is actually higher. The requirement of insulin becomes higher and higher the higher your heart rate goes. So most people make the mistake of only reducing, and you may be doing this intuitively. You know intuitively, I have too much insulin to go for a walk. Right? I have too much insulin to go ride my bike. My kid has too much insulin to go play in the backyard. Let me cut it by 50%. But the reality is, 50% only matches the natural energy source when you are really working hard. It actually has to be reduced much, much more than that if you are doing something like walking or playing in the yard. Okay? So if you are doing exercise in the aerobic zone, the counterintuitive relationship is the presence of insulin actually has to be higher. So now we are at a 50-50 split. Okay, next slide. Now, heart rate zone 4. This is known as the anaerobic zone. And for adults, this would be something like CrossFit or like a hard weightlifting session, for example. Okay? Now, in this zone is 80 to 90% of your maximum heart rate. A healthy person should be able to do this exercise for up to 20 minutes. Okay? Look what the energy ratio is. It has completely flip-flopped. Now the vast majority of energy comes from glucose-based sources, and only a small amount comes from lipid sources. Now, the standard guidance is, we don't know what to tell you, but just in case, eat 30 to 60 grams of carbs. Okay? And why is that? The fear of hypoglycemia. The fear is real. The hypoglycemia is usually not. But the fear is real, and I've lived it. I know what every single person is going through. That fear, okay? Let's get rid of that fear. Let's let go of the fear of hypoglycemia so that we can start enjoying exercise. Now, the GlucoseZone guidance for this zone is the same. You match the presence of insulin. So you'll see, if you're on an insulin pump, now the decrease is only 15%, right? So as the heart rate goes up, the presence of insulin is higher and higher. So when you're in an anaerobic zone, you have a pump, you only decrease your basal by 15%. But there is something very important. And what's important is you have to determine your body's ability to generate counter-regulatory hormones and maintain glycogen in the muscles. The reason why I say that is everybody with diabetes is familiar with insulin. Okay, next slide. Oh, you got me on the insulin with the N. Okay, everybody is familiar with insulin. Guess what? Insulin is the only hormone. There's one hormone that causes glucose levels to go down. There are 6 hormones that cause glucose levels to go up. 1 insulin, 6 counter-regulatory hormones. And if you don't remember anything else from this talk, just Google counter-regulatory hormones. Okay? Because it will open up your mind to things that you've been experiencing that have been so baffling. So counter-regulatory hormones, let's start with the top one, glucagon. Who here has ever heard the term beta cells? Okay, beta cells are housed in your pancreas. What do beta cells produce? They produce insulin. Well, if there's a beta, what does that mean? There has to be an alpha, right? Alpha cells produce glucagon. In a healthy non-diabetic person, endocrine system, insulin and glucagon play a very sophisticated tango. And they're like yin and yang. When insulin is going up, glucagon is going down. Why is insulin supposed to go up? Because food-based sugar has come in, right? And vice versa. When insulin goes down, glucagon goes up. Why is that? Because the natural response to activity is, do I have any food-based sugar? No. Okay, let me release some glucagon. What glucagon does is stimulate the release of stored energy. So glucagon is a catabolic hormone. Catabolic means breakdown. Insulin is an anabolic hormone. Anabolic means build up. Okay? Growth hormone. Message to all the parents in the world. If your children all of a sudden between the age of 10 to 24 start suddenly having bad A1Cs, it is not their fault. They haven't done anything wrong. They haven't been sneaking Skittles in the middle of the night. There's something called growth hormone. And guess what it does? It causes glucose levels to go up. Now, for those of us that are older than our teenage years, you should be pleasantly surprised to know that growth hormone is a hormone that stays in our body well into our elder years. And in fact, a healthy endocrine system produces growth hormone every day. Cortisol is a stress hormone. I made the mistake, the hotel we're staying at is 3 miles away from here. I got a taxi at like 4:30 this afternoon, okay? I should have just walked. It would have been much better for my glucose, okay? Because I was just sitting there in traffic, and I was getting stressed out. And I was watching my CGM, like literally the arrow, it was here, then like 5 minutes later, it was here, and by the time I got here, the arrow was like coming out of the screen, okay? These are real things. Now, epinephrine, okay, and norepinephrine are associated with adrenaline, okay? Adrenaline gets referred randomly all the time. Oh, my adrenaline did it. My adrenaline did it. Well, let me ask you a question. What does your heart rate do when you have adrenaline? Does it beat really slowly or does it beat really quickly? Right? Whether you're excited, whether you're nervous, whether you're in a fight, whether you're in a flight. Okay? So is it possible to monitor the hormone epinephrine? Is that currently possible? No, it's not. It's a trick question. Can't do it. There is no finger stick to check for the presence of adrenaline. I've looked into it. But can I monitor my heart rate? So this is where it's so amazing how if we follow our heart, we can actually have awareness of these other things happening in our body. Estrogen causes glucose levels to go up. I had a very embarrassing experience about a year and a half ago where I had a female client, great client. She's been with me for like 5 years. And she comes to our center, and she had a particularly rough day where her diabetes was just all over the place. And I said to her after the session, I said, you know, I really have noticed, like every once in a while, you really have these weird things happening. Okay? It just really seems different. Can you think of any reason why that would be? Okay? And she said, well, yeah, my period. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh my God. I think about diabetes more than anybody I know. I had never, ever, ever, ever once thought about the impact of the menstrual cycle on diabetes. And this is a problem. We are in an amazing hall. I think that's a man, even though he has a long hair. So the reality is, right, science is still a mostly male-dominated field, and it is to the detriment of all. And I'm so aware of it now, okay? I went and looked at the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists. It's a very well-respected board, and please don't take this the wrong way, AACE. I looked at the name of the board. There's 19 men and one name which I couldn't really tell if it was a man or a woman. Okay? So these are real things. Counter-regulatory hormones are real things. And if you just go back one slide, if you could, you have to determine the ability to generate that. And why do I say that? Some people living with type 1 diabetes, not only is their ability to produce insulin affected by their diagnosis of type 1, but other parts of their pancreas have been affected too. And their ability to produce glucagon may also have been affected. There are things like thyroidism, hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism. The pancreas is part of the endocrine system. So you need to confirm, are your counter-regulatory hormones working properly? It's a very, very important thing. Okay? All right. One skip and the last one. Okay. Heart rate zone 5, your maximum effort. This is 90 to 100% of your heart rate. The limit is 3 minutes. There's a reason, guys, why a boxing match is 3 minutes. Because it's physiologically impossible to go all out for more than 3 minutes. Okay? The energy ratio is almost exclusively glucose-based. Okay? Now, the standard guidance is, okay, fine, we will admit your glucose levels might rise, but just in case, eat 60 grams of carbs. Okay? Again, the fear of hypoglycemia just dominating everything. What do we say? Match the presence of insulin. So if you are going to be exercising, doing maximum effort, if you are going to be in a street fight, make sure to set your insulin pump only 10% less 1 hour before. Okay, all right. Next slide. So what this is a visual representation of what we just went through. And what you can see is each zone, each heart rate zone, and the energy ratio associated with the zone. Okay? Now, based on everything we just talked about, I think it's clear to understand why glucose levels would go up if we did exercise in zone 5 or zone 4. Okay? But most people with type 1 struggle with zone 1 and zone 2. It's all I did was go for a walk. Okay? It's the frustration. The parents, I would ask you to understand and empathize, and hopefully this is going to provide some clarity. For anybody who doesn't have diabetes, if you decided to walk, if I had decided to walk from the hotel to here, would I have had to chug 2 Gatorades and eat a Snickers to get here? No, you don't have to do that. Why is that? Because this relationship is involuntary for people who do not have type 1 diabetes. It just happens. As soon as you start walking, the presence of insulin drops way down, way, way, way down. And you start utilizing lipids. Okay? So, next slide. The trick, the whole secret here, is to match the presence of insulin to the natural energy ratio. Okay? So if you are going to go for a walk, you have to lower the presence of insulin down all the way, decrease by 85%. Way down. If you are going to go for a bike ride, if you're going to go play in the yard, if you are going to go for a nice jog on the lake, down. Whereas, are you going to play a soccer game? Are you going to do a 5K? Are you going to play basketball? Are you going to do that awesome spin class? Now, 50%. The actual counterintuitive thing is that the presence of insulin has to be a little higher. Let's take anaerobic. Are we going to do CrossFit? Are we going to pump it up? Right? Presence of insulin has to be higher. Why does it have to be higher? Because that is the natural energy ratio. Lastly, are we going to be in a street fight? Okay, but in more seriousness, are we a hockey player? How long are hockey shifts? 3 minutes. Okay? So if you are doing something like that, you follow your heart. You follow your heart metaphysically, and when it comes to type 1 diabetes, you literally follow your heart. Next slide. Now, I've been talking a lot about insulin pumps. Okay? Only 25% of people living with type 1 diabetes wear insulin pumps. The other 75% use multiple daily injections, which is what I do. So how do you manage that? Well, the rule is actually very straightforward, but it takes some coordination with your doctor. The first thing is you get the long-acting dosage right. And the entire dosaging for your long-acting insulin should be based, right, on enabling healthy lipid utilization. Okay? For fast-acting insulin, and I want to be very clear with that. So enabling healthy lipid utilization with your long-acting may take some work with your doctor. It may take some experimentation. And you may not have been thinking about it like that. In fact, many people use their long-acting insulin to combat food-derived, they're called excursions in glucose. Okay? You should not be using your long-acting insulin for food-based excursions in glucose. That is what your bolus is for. And the rule with the bolus or fast-acting is very straightforward. Once you get the long-acting right, and you're enabling healthy lipid utilization, the rule is very straightforward. If you are exercising after 2 hours of eating, you take the full bolus for the food. So for example, if I had a turkey sandwich with French fries, and I would take 10 units of insulin, following the 2-hour rule. If I was going to be exercising within 2 hours, I cut it in half. So I would take 5 units. And of course, I'm using that as an example, and you need to apply your absorption rate and sensitivity to insulin. But the point is, for MDI, it is actually a very straightforward rule. The 2-hour rule, and then making sure that your long-acting insulin is enabling healthy lipid utilization. Okay, so that relationship is one of 6 things. Okay? For people with type 1, understanding this counterintuitive relationship goes a long, long way to having more success with exercise and diabetes. It is not the only thing. These other 5 elements are there for a reason. I'm going to be sharing more on those other 5 elements at my talk in the ADA this weekend. Next slide. But I want to really encourage you, follow your heart. You'll feel better. You'll have more success with your exercise, okay? And it will really, really help you to let go of the fear of hypoglycemia. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share this information.